Elior Kane had never cared much for crowds, for the endless chatter of city life, or for the constant demands of other people. He had spent decades hopping between planets, exploring abandoned space stations, wandering through alien markets, and studying strange ruins. But no matter where he went, he felt a certain emptiness, a longing for a place where he could exist without interruption. That longing led him to Tyrolus, a planet at the edge of mapped space. The listings described it simply: uninhabited, rough terrain, potentially habitable, no known resources, minimal interest. For most, it was worthless. For Elior, it was perfect. He bought the planet with a mixture of excitement and relief, imagining himself alone, free to explore its rocky valleys and jagged cliffs without any distractions. No corporations, no explorers, no colonists, just him and the silent stars. The landing was smooth. Tyrolus greeted him with harsh winds that whipped over a red-orange desert, dotted with black rock formations. The sky was pale, almost silver, and during the day, the sun hung close to the horizon, casting long shadows across the uneven surface. Elior stepped off his small starship, his boots crunching on the sharp gravel. He inhaled the thin air, satisfied. It smelled faintly metallic but clean, almost like nothing at all. He surveyed the area. No smoke, no tracks, no sound of engines, just the wind and the faint, distant hum of the planet itself. Empty, he muttered, smiling. Finally, truly empty. Elior wasted no time. He began unloading supplies, compact shelters, water purifiers, solar panels, basic tools, and rations. He set up a small base near the mouth of a jagged canyon that offered both shelter from the frequent storms and a vantage point over the surrounding terrain. From there, he could see for miles. Tyrolus was wide and wild, and he wanted to understand every inch of it. The first day passed quietly. Elior explored nearby rock formations, mapping out the terrain in his digital tablet, marking potential water sources and areas of interest. He found small streams trickling from underground aquifers, patches of strange blue moss that seemed to glow faintly at night, and shallow caves that might provide shelter during storms. He documented everything carefully, enjoying the silence and the sense of control. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged somewhere. But Tyrolus, as beautiful as it was not entirely quiet. Small signs of life appeared, scattered footprints that were too large to be human, the rustle of something moving too fast to follow, and occasional guttural sounds that echoed across the cliffs at night. Elior paused when he first noticed them, frowning. He had expected isolation, but he hadn't expected complete emptiness. It's probably just local wildlife, he reasoned, scanning the shadows. Nothing to worry about. Yet even as he convinced himself, a shiver ran down his spine. The footprints weren't like any animal he had ever seen. They were too deliberate, too organized, as if whoever or whatever left them had intelligence. Night fell, and Tyrolus revealed a new kind of beauty. The sky shifted from pale silver to deep indigo, scattered with countless stars. Elior lit a small campfire outside his shelter, sipping warm tea from a thermos, and watched the sky. The silence was profound. In the city, the night was noisy, full of lights and engines and chatter. Here, it was infinite. He could hear the wind, the faint trickle of distant water, and the subtle movement of the terrain itself. As he sat, he thought about what life on this planet could be. He imagined walking through untouched valleys, cataloging new species, and surviving entirely on his own. The thought thrilled him. Yet at the edge of his awareness, he felt the faintest presence, like being watched. He scanned the cliffs and shadows, but nothing moved. Perhaps it was the wind. Perhaps it was the planet playing tricks on him. The second day, Elior explored further. He climbed a steep ridge, using ropes and climbing gear to reach the top, where he could see the planet stretch endlessly in every direction. From there, he spotted something unusual, a cluster of dark shapes moving across a distant canyon floor. He squinted, trying to make them out. They moved in a coordinated way, almost like a pack, yet they were humanoid in shape. Elior crouched behind a rock, heart pounding. He hadn't expected anyone else. Maybe they're explorers, he whispered to himself, though he knew the chances were slim. The shapes vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving only more silence. He took careful notes, then headed back to his base, his mind racing. By the third day, Elior's routine had settled. He checked water supplies, repaired broken panels, and mapped new areas. Yet, the subtle signs of life persisted. He found broken branches arranged in strange patterns, claw marks on rocks, and shallow pits dug in odd places. The evidence suggested intelligence, but not hostility, at least not yet. He also discovered something else. Tyrolus was richer than it seemed. Small fruits grew on resilient bushes, strange animals roamed the canyons, and underground springs bubbled faintly. With careful planning, he could live comfortably here, learning the planet's rhythms and adapting to its challenges. He felt a thrill of pride. Humans could survive anywhere, he thought. Even on a planet that seemed empty, ingenuity and adaptability could turn barrenness into home. As night fell again, the wind carried a sound, a soft, almost whispering noise that made him freeze. It came from the canyon, a distant shuffle followed by silence. He grabbed a small flashlight and aimed it toward the source, but the shadows were empty. Still, he felt a presence, deliberate and patient. Tyrolus was not as empty as he had believed. Elior decided to stay vigilant. He built a small perimeter of traps, not to harm anyone, but to alert him if something approached. He also set up mirrors and reflective surfaces to see movement in the dark. His mind raced with possibilities: intelligent alien life, unknown predators, or perhaps something more mysterious. Whatever it was, he would face it. Humans had survived deserts, jungles, frozen wastelands, and the void of space itself. He would not be afraid. By the fourth day, Tyrolus began to feel like home. Elior moved confidently across the terrain, carrying water, collecting moss samples, and cataloging small animals. He even set up a small greenhouse, growing basic vegetables from seeds he had brought with him. He marveled at the contrast. This barren, rocky planet could sustain life with patience and effort. It reminded him of humanity's own resilience, adaptable, curious, and never satisfied with emptiness. Yet, in the back of his mind, he could not shake the feeling that he was being observed. Each evening he heard movement on the cliffs, whispers carried by the wind, and fleeting shadows that vanished before he could reach them. He trained himself to ignore it, focusing instead on exploration and survival. On the fifth day, as he rested on a ridge overlooking a deep canyon, he saw them clearly for the first time. 3 figures, moving gracefully and silently, descended toward a stream. They were humanoid, but taller and more slender than humans, with long limbs built for speed and endurance. Their skin was pale, almost luminescent under Tyrolus's sun, and their eyes gleamed with intelligence. Elior froze. They were hunting, or at least searching, but their gaze was not on him yet. He observed, fascinated. These creatures were unlike any humans he had met. They moved in perfect coordination, communicated with gestures and subtle signals, and seemed to understand the environment in ways he could only guess at. "They've never seen a human," he whispered, realizing that this encounter was as unique as it was dangerous. Tyrolus, the planet he thought empty, was alive, and it had been waiting. Elior Kane had spent several days observing the strange figures on Tyrolus from a safe distance. They moved with precision, almost like a single organism, yet each seemed aware of the other's presence. He had not been seen, or at least he thought so. Still, the thought of being watched was unsettling. He was a visitor on his own purchased planet, and now it seemed the planet had visitors of its own. On the 6th day, as the sun crept low over the horizon, Elior noticed movement closer than ever before. The figures emerged from the rocky cliffs surrounding his base, stepping lightly over jagged stones. He counted 4 this time, and the way they moved made it clear they were hunting something or someone. Elior ducked behind a rock, his pulse quickening. He had always been careful, always prepared, but this was the first time he truly feared for his safety. The creatures were humanoid, taller than humans, with long limbs built for agility. Their skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, and their eyes glowed with sharp intelligence. He could not tell their intentions. They could be curious, or they could be dangerous. He decided to remain still and observe. He did not want to make the first move. As he watched, the Huntresses, because he realized they must be female, split into 2 groups. One group approached the shallow stream near his base, while the other moved along the cliffs, scanning every shadow. It was clear they were coordinating, communicating silently with gestures and subtle body movements. Elior had seen teamwork before, on human teams, on alien colonies, and even on some of the galaxy's most efficient predator packs. But this was different. These Huntresses were precise, patient, and deliberate. They were starving, he realized. He could see the tension in their movements, the slight droop of their muscles, and the careful calculation of every step. He needed to decide, hide and hope they passed, or make contact and risk revealing himself. Humans were resourceful, he reminded himself. The galaxy had always underestimated humanity's adaptability. He would observe a little longer. By nightfall, the Huntresses had circled his base without entering it. Their shadows stretched over the campfire's glow, but they did not attack. Elior realized something important. They were not mindless predators. They were intelligent. They were curious. And they were hungry. Over the next 2 days, Elior set up subtle defenses around his perimeter. Simple tripwires connected to noisemakers, reflective mirrors to catch any movement, and small traps designed only to alert him. Each night, he watched them test the boundaries. Sometimes a huntress would step too close to a trap and spring it, retreating quickly with a glance that made him think she understood the warning. One evening, Elior decided to try an experiment. He left a small pile of food, dried fruits and protein packs, just outside one of the tripwires. He hid behind a rock and waited. Minutes passed, and finally a huntress approached. She sniffed the air, studied the pile, and looked directly at him. Her eyes were wide and intelligent, filled with both hunger and caution. Elior raised a hand slowly, signaling he meant no harm. The huntress tilted her head, almost as if considering him. She then took a single piece of fruit and disappeared into the darkness. Elior exhaled, a mixture of relief and fascination washing over him. They were smart. They were learning. The following morning, he explored the canyon where he had first seen them descend. He found signs of recent activity, footprints, broken branches arranged in patterns, and shallow holes dug into the soil. Whoever these Huntresses were, they were careful, deliberate, and aware of their environment. Their intelligence was clear, and he realized that they were not just surviving, they were thriving in ways he could barely comprehend. By the 4th day of observation, Elior had begun to map their movements. He noticed patterns. They hunted at dawn and dusk. They used the terrain to their advantage, and they communicated silently. He began to anticipate their actions, moving his traps and observations based on their likely paths. Each day he grew more confident. Humanity's skill in adaptation, problem-solving, and observation gave him an advantage even here, on a planet that was not his alone. Then, something unexpected happened. A severe storm struck Tyrolus, stronger than any Elior had experienced. Winds ripped across the canyon, tossing rocks and debris. Rain fell in sheets, and the temperature dropped sharply. He secured his shelter and braced for the worst, worried about his fragile greenhouse and the water supply. To his surprise, the Huntresses appeared, struggling against the storm. They had sought shelter near his base, and though he did not understand their language or gestures, he realized they were desperate. Without hesitation, Elior activated his emergency lights and guided them to a protected area he had prepared. They hesitated, wary, but followed. For the first time, he had direct contact. They were not attacking. They were seeking help. Humanity's instinct to survive, and to survive together, kicked in. He shared what little he had, dried fruits, water, and warmth near the fire. The Huntresses accepted cautiously, and Elior noticed subtle signs of gratitude, a tilt of the head, a soft exhale, and a steady gaze that lingered longer than mere curiosity. After the storm passed, Elior realized something important. He had established a fragile connection, a bridge of understanding. These Huntresses were not just aliens. They were intelligent beings who could learn, adapt, and respond. And in this moment, he understood a fundamental truth about humans. Ingenuity and empathy could survive even the harshest conditions. Over the next few days, he experimented further. He left supplies in patterns, creating a silent communication system. The Huntresses began responding, leaving small gifts in return, pieces of fruit he had not noticed, small stones arranged in symbols, and subtle gestures of recognition. Elior was thrilled. He was the first human they had encountered, and already they were beginning to understand him. But he also knew the danger had not passed. They were starving, and hunger could drive even intelligent beings to aggression. He had to continue earning their trust while preparing for any sudden attack. Tyralis, he realized, was not a place for complacency. Survival required observation, strategy, and patience, qualities that humanity had mastered long ago. One evening, as the twin moons of Tyralis rose, Elior observed the Huntresses practicing their hunting techniques near a rocky ridge. They moved silently, leaping from stone to stone, testing the terrain and honing their skills. He noticed that they were not just surviving, they were preparing for something, perhaps another predator, perhaps an unknown challenge. But he also saw the same quality that made humans exceptional: intelligence, adaptability, and determination. Elior decided it was time to take a calculated risk. He approached cautiously, hands raised, showing no threat. The Huntresses froze, their eyes tracking his every movement. He spoke softly, knowing they could not understand his words, but hoping that tone and gesture would convey intent. Slowly, one Huntress stepped forward, studying him, and then another followed. They did not attack. They did not flee. They simply watched, curious and cautious. That night, Elior slept with a sense of cautious optimism. The Huntresses had not been hostile. They had not ignored him. They had observed, learned, and even interacted in subtle ways. He realized that humanity's greatest strength, the ability to adapt, understand, and build relationships, was now his greatest advantage on Tyralis. By the 10th day, a routine had formed. Elior would explore and document the planet during the day, while the Huntresses observed or tested his presence from a distance. At night, they gathered near his base, sometimes leaving small signs of recognition. Stones arranged in patterns, small gifts of food, or gestures that suggested trust. Elior marveled at their intelligence. They had survived months of starvation, navigating the harsh terrain of Tyralis with skill and precision. Yet they had never encountered a human before, and now, for the first time, they were learning to adapt to his presence. Humanity had entered a new chapter on this planet, not through force or dominance, but through observation, strategy, and patience. He realized that Tyralis, the planet he had thought empty, was no longer just a refuge. It was a testing ground, a place where human ingenuity could shine. He had survived deserts, alien worlds, and abandoned space stations. He had faced solitude, hunger, and danger. Now, he faced the unknown intelligence of another species, and he was ready. Elior Kane smiled quietly to himself as the twin moons reflected on the rocks around him. He was no longer alone, and yet he was not at risk. Humanity had always been underestimated, and now, on the edge of the galaxy, it was about to prove its resilience once more. The Huntresses had arrived, and Tyralis would never be empty again. Elior Kane had learned a lot in the days since the Huntresses arrived. He had observed their movements, their strategies, and their intelligence. He had begun to understand that Tyralis was no longer a quiet, empty planet. It was alive, watching him and challenging him. Yet nothing could prepare him for the moment when they confronted him directly. It happened on the morning of the 12th day. The sky was pale with Tyralis's thin sunlight, and the wind carried the faint scent of minerals from the rocky cliffs. Elior was checking a small water spring when he noticed movement along the ridge above him. 3 Huntresses had separated from their group and were approaching him. Their posture was cautious, their eyes sharp and intelligent. But there was no fear. Elior straightened, hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. He had spent days preparing for this encounter, studying their behavior, learning the patterns of their hunts. Yet even with all that preparation, a surge of adrenaline raced through him. These were alien beings, skilled in survival and observation, and now they were focused entirely on him. As they reached him, they stopped a few meters away, circling him slowly, like wolves examining prey. But Elior realized quickly, they were not here to attack. They were testing him. This was a trial, not a hunt. He spoke softly, though he knew they could not understand his words. "I mean no harm," he said, his tone calm and measured. "I only want to survive, like you." The Huntresses tilted their heads, exchanging glances among themselves. One of them stepped forward, extending a slender arm toward a nearby rock. She pointed at it, then at Elior, then back at the rock. He understood immediately this was the beginning of their test. They wanted to see how he would respond, how he would think, how he would adapt. And Elior Kane, a human, was ready to prove himself. He picked up the rock and moved it carefully to the spot she had indicated. She watched silently, eyes sharp with calculation. Elior realized that this was not just about strength or speed. It was about intelligence, observation, and understanding. Humanity had always thrived in challenges that required thinking, and he would rely on that strength now. For the next several hours, Elior faced a series of trials. The Huntresses led him through rocky terrain, setting subtle obstacles in his path. He had to navigate narrow cliffs, leap across unstable rocks, and use basic tools to manipulate objects in their environment. Each action was observed closely, each decision noted. At one point, they led him to a narrow canyon where a small herd of alien creatures was trapped. The Huntresses watched as Elior figured out a way to free the creatures without harming them. He used rocks and branches to build a simple ramp, guiding the animals to safety. When the creatures escaped, the Huntresses let out soft, almost musical sounds. It was not a roar or a warning, it was approval. Elior smiled quietly. Humanity had survived countless challenges on Earth and beyond because of cleverness and adaptability. Even in the face of intelligent predators or unknown species, humans had a way of understanding, adapting, and thriving. The trials continued. At one point, they led him to a deep ravine. Crossing it required building a makeshift bridge with fallen logs and vines. Elior worked carefully, observing the strength of each material, testing balance, and ensuring stability. He could feel the eyes of the Huntresses on him the entire time. Their trust had not yet been earned, but respect could be won, and he intended to earn it. By mid-afternoon, the sun hung low in the Tyralis sky, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain. Elior had proven himself in observation, problem-solving, and quick thinking. Yet the Huntresses were not done. They wanted to see something more, the ability to survive as a team, to cooperate under pressure. They led him to a section of canyon prone to sudden flash floods. Dark clouds gathered above, the air vibrating with the distant sound of thunder. Elior recognized the danger immediately. The Huntresses moved to higher ground, but he realized that the lower canyon where he had been standing would be flooded within minutes. Thinking quickly, he grabbed a large piece of rock and signaled the Huntresses, gesturing toward the water and pointing to higher ground. The Huntresses hesitated at first, then began to follow his lead. Together, they climbed the rocky slope, navigating unstable footing and sudden gusts of wind. When they reached safety, Elior looked back at the canyon below, where the water surged in a torrent. The Huntresses, for the first time, did not circle him or test him. They simply observed him silently. Their approval was clear in the tilt of their heads and the soft sounds they made. That night, Elior and the Huntresses camped near a cliff overlooking a vast valley. The twin moons of Tyralis rose, illuminating the rugged landscape. Elior offered them dried fruits and water, sharing the little he had prepared. They accepted cautiously, but with a sense of recognition. He realized that he had passed their trial, not by force, not by fear, but through ingenuity, intelligence, and respect for their world. In the days that followed, Elior continued to work alongside the Huntresses. They began to teach him about the planet, pointing out edible plants, safe shelters, and areas to avoid. He learned to read their gestures, understanding subtle signs of warning, curiosity, or approval. It was a slow process, but humanity's greatest skill, communication and adaptability, allowed him to bridge the gap between species. One morning, as they explored a series of caves near his base, a small tremor shook the ground. Rocks tumbled from the cliffs above, and the wind howled through the canyon. Elior acted instinctively, signaling the Huntresses to follow him to a stable ledge. Together they navigated the collapsing terrain, moving with speed and precision. It was a true test of survival under pressure. When the danger passed, the Huntresses paused. Their glowing eyes met his, and Elior felt a profound sense of connection. He was no longer just a human in their world. He was someone they recognized as capable, reliable, and intelligent. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A pack of small but aggressive creatures emerged from the shadows, drawn by the scent of food. They moved quickly, their claws scraping rocks, eyes fixed on the group. The Huntresses prepared to attack, but Elior stepped forward, signaling them to wait. He picked up a long branch and used it to create a barrier, guiding the creatures away without harming them. The Huntresses watched, impressed. He had not fought with strength alone, but with strategy. Humanity's advantage, thinking ahead, using intelligence instead of sheer force, had once again proved effective. The creatures retreated and Elior returned to the group, breathing heavily, but smiling. Over the next week, Elior and the Huntresses formed a fragile bond. They began exploring Tyralis together, combining his technological knowledge with their survival skills. He helped them build simple tools and shelters, while they taught him how to navigate the planet's rugged terrain, find water, and identify edible plants. Elior marveled at their intelligence. They were patient, observant, and quick learners. Yet they had never encountered a human before. And now they were beginning to adapt to his presence. Humanity, he realized, was unique not because of strength, but because of ingenuity, empathy, and the ability to form connections. By the end of the third week, Elior understood something profound. Tyralis was no longer a lonely planet. It had become a place of learning, survival, and cooperation. The Huntresses, once mysterious and potentially dangerous, were now allies. They had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately respected him, not as prey, but as a being capable of strategy, courage, and understanding. One evening, as the twin moons of Tyralis rose over the horizon, Elior sat by the campfire with the Huntresses nearby. They watched him with glowing eyes, silent but attentive. He offered them fruit, and they accepted, their movements precise and deliberate. For the first time, he felt truly connected to another species, and he realized that this bond had been earned through trials, challenges, and shared experiences. Elior Kane smiled. Tyralis, the planet he had bought to live alone, was no longer empty. It was alive with intelligence, resilience, and curiosity. And he, a human, had proven himself capable of surviving, adapting, and thriving alongside beings who had once seemed so alien. Humanity had once again triumphed, not through domination, but through ingenuity, courage, and the ability to connect. Tyralis had tested him, and he had passed. The planet had taught him a lesson that no solitary isolation ever could. Survival was not just about enduring, it was about understanding, learning, and proving that even a single human mind could make a difference in the galaxy. And as the wind whispered across the cliffs and the twin moons reflected in the valley below, Elior Kane knew one truth clearly. Tyralis was no longer a planet to escape to. It was a planet to live on, to thrive on, and to share with beings who had learned, as he had, that intelligence and cooperation could conquer even the harshest worlds. The trial was over. Humanity had triumphed. Elior decided then that he would not flee. Instead, he would watch, learn, and prepare. Humans had faced the unknown countless times, and he had no intention of being caught unready. Tyralis might be inhabited, but intelligence, adaptability, and courage were human strengths. And Elior Kane was nothing if not a human ready to survive. As night fell, the wind carrying the faintest whisper of movement across the canyon, Elior sat by his campfire, thinking of the challenges ahead. He did not know if these beings were friend or foe, but he was certain of one thing. Life on Tyralis would never be lonely again. He smiled. Finally, someone, or something, was watching him. The days on Tyralis had grown into weeks, and the planet that Elior Kane had purchased to live alone was no longer empty. The Huntresses had accepted him not as a stranger, not as prey, but as a being they could trust. Together they had survived storms, navigated treacherous cliffs, and faced aggressive wildlife. Humanity's ingenuity had earned a place in their society, and Elior felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. It began with small steps. Elior and the Huntresses worked side by side, building a stronger base for shelter and storage. He taught them to use simple tools to carry water from the streams, to repair shelters with rocks and vines, and to dig small canals for irrigation. They were quick learners, and in return, the Huntresses taught him to read the land, to find edible plants hidden in rocky soil, and to anticipate the movement of native animals. Elior realized that the combination of human creativity and the Huntresses' survival skills was powerful. Together, they could turn even a harsh, barren planet into a place where life could thrive. The once rocky, unforgiving terrain now bore signs of change. Small gardens grew near the base, carefully planted by the team. Water channels carried clean water to feeding areas for small alien animals, and shelters were reinforced with both human ingenuity and the Huntresses' knowledge of the environment. One morning, as Elior explored a nearby valley, he noticed new plant growth sprouting near a stream. Some of the plants had been planted by the Huntresses, who were experimenting with the seeds he had brought. Others seemed to be growing naturally, encouraged by the careful irrigation and protection they had provided. Elior smiled. Humanity's adaptability and resourcefulness could turn even the wildest planets into places of life. The Huntresses began to trust him more openly. They no longer circled him cautiously or tested his skills constantly. Instead, they followed him, learning from his methods and offering guidance from their own experiences. One of the Huntresses, whom Elior had begun to call Lyra in his own mind, often stayed close to him, observing how he built tools, set up shelters, or analyzed plant growth. Her curiosity reminded him of young humans eager to learn, yet her skill and agility were unmatched. Elior also realized the importance of culture and communication. He began to develop a simple system of symbols and gestures, combining some of the signs the Huntresses had already used. Through these gestures, they could communicate basic needs, warnings, and even share ideas. For the first time, he felt a sense of true collaboration. Tyralis was no longer a challenge to face alone. It was a shared home. One afternoon, while exploring a deep canyon, Elior and the Huntresses came across a hidden cave system. Inside, strange mineral formations glowed faintly in the dim light. Elior immediately saw the potential. These caves could provide safe storage for supplies and a shelter during storms. He marked the entrance and carefully guided the Huntresses, showing them how to reinforce the walls and create small compartments. They worked together efficiently, and by evening, the caves were transformed into a secure shelter. It was during these days that Elior realized a deeper truth. Humans were remarkable not for physical strength alone, but for intelligence, creativity, and the ability to inspire cooperation. The Huntresses had survived on Tyralis for months, yet it was a single human who had brought organization, planning, and innovation that could improve their lives. He felt pride, not in himself alone, but in humanity's potential to adapt and thrive anywhere. Weeks turned into months. The settlement grew steadily. Small gardens flourished, streams were carefully managed, and shelters expanded to accommodate all the Huntresses. Elior even managed to build a small observatory, allowing him to study the stars and the galaxy beyond Tyralis. The planet that had seemed empty at first now teemed with life and activity, all thanks to the combined efforts of a human and a group of intelligent alien survivors. One evening, as the twin moons of Tyralis rose over the cliffs, Elior watched the Huntresses practice hunting techniques. But now, instead of being alone or cautious, he participated with them. They moved together in the valleys, testing strategies, scouting for resources, and learning from each other. He realized that this was no longer a lesson in survival alone. It was a lesson in community, intelligence, and adaptation. The planet continued to test them. Violent storms, flash floods, and the occasional predator reminded them that survival was never easy. Yet each challenge strengthened their bond. Elior's human ingenuity, combined with the Huntress's skill, allowed them to face each difficulty and come out stronger. Tyralis was no longer a barren wasteland. It had become a place of learning, growth, and life. As time passed, Elior and the Huntresses began experimenting with more advanced tools. They constructed simple devices to filter water faster, set up systems to collect rainwater, and even started growing new crops from seeds Elior had brought. The Huntresses quickly adapted to the new techniques, learning to combine their natural skills with his technology. Together, they created a sustainable system that allowed them to thrive in an environment that had once been deadly. Elior marveled at how quickly the Huntresses learned. He realized that intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to cooperate were traits that defined humanity's success across the galaxy. On Tyralis, these traits were being mirrored by the Huntresses, creating a new model of survival that combined two species' strengths. One night, while watching the stars from the observatory, Elior thought about the future. Tyralis was no longer a refuge for one human. It was a home for a new community, a place where intelligence and cooperation allowed life to flourish. The Huntresses had begun to see him as more than an outsider. He was a teacher, a strategist, and a partner. Humanity had proven itself not through domination, but through ingenuity, empathy, and the ability to connect with others. The planet had also changed. Streams now carried water to small fields, plants grew in carefully tended plots, and small creatures returned to the land, encouraged by the settlement's protection. Tyralis was no longer a symbol of isolation. It was a symbol of what could happen when intelligence, effort, and cooperation met opportunity. The Huntresses, once wary and cautious, now trusted Elior fully. They learned to anticipate his strategies, and he learned to anticipate theirs. Together they planned for the future, expanding shelters, exploring more of the planet, and developing systems that could support more life. Tyralis was becoming a hub of innovation, not through machines alone, but through the ingenuity of beings who understood the value of intelligence and collaboration. One day, while exploring a canyon with Lyra, Elior noticed fresh footprints. Another species, perhaps travelers passing through Tyralis. But instead of fear, he felt excitement. Tyralis had begun as an empty planet, but it had become a place of opportunity. Humanity's presence had transformed it, not through force, but through intelligence, patience, and ingenuity. Elior realized that humans had a unique ability to change their environment while respecting it. Tyralis had tested him with storms, predators, and the unknown intelligence of the Huntresses, yet humanity had triumphed, not by dominance, but by creativity, courage, and collaboration. He smiled, knowing that this planet, once thought empty, was now a testament to human potential. Over time, the small community on Tyralis grew stronger. Systems for water, food, and shelter were secure. The Huntresses had learned human techniques, and Elior had learned their survival skills. Together, they faced the challenges of the planet, overcoming dangers that might have killed them individually. Tyralis was no longer empty. It was alive with learning, adaptation, and the quiet strength of a human mind at work. As the twin moons of Tyralis set over the horizon one evening, Elior sat with Lyra and the other Huntresses, watching the valley below. The settlements glowed softly, small fires illuminating the paths and shelters they had built. The wind carried the faint rustle of leaves, the sound of running water, and the occasional call of native creatures returning to the land. Tyralis was thriving. Elior realized something profound. Humanity's greatest power was not in weapons, technology, or numbers. It was in ingenuity, courage, adaptability, and the ability to connect with others, even beings so different from themselves. Tyralis had been a test of all these qualities, and humanity had passed. He looked at the Huntresses, at the thriving settlement, and at the growing plants along the streams. The planet that had once been empty was now a home, a place of learning and survival, a symbol of what could be achieved when intelligence and cooperation met opportunity. Humanity had triumphed, not through strength but through the mind, the heart, and the will to adapt. Elior Kane smiled quietly. He had come to Tyralis to live alone, to escape civilization, and to find solitude. Instead, he had found life, community, and purpose. The Huntresses had taught him as much as he had taught them, and together, they had transformed a barren planet into a place of hope and opportunity. Tyralis, once empty and forgotten, was now a beacon of resilience. It was proof that human ingenuity could thrive anywhere, even on the edge of the galaxy, among beings who had never seen a human before. And as the twin moons rose high above the cliffs, Elior Kane knew one truth. Humanity, with its courage, creativity, and heart, could survive and flourish in any world. The planet was no longer empty. Humanity had arrived.